Hey there. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm excited to be with you. For those of you all who don't know me, my name is Alyson Van Hooser. I am an author, a keynote speaker, and a leadership trainer. Today we're talking specifically about the COVID-19 and the quarantine that's happening in the United States. So I have no doubt that the COVID-19 quarantine is going to have everlasting effects on the Generation Z workforce. Because right now, they are in some of the most formative years of their life. Now, I'm a student of generations in the workforce and how they show up in the workplace. So my mind is already thinking about how everything around the COVID-19 pandemic is going to shape the youngest generation in the workforce over the next couple of months, years, and even decades. And I gotta tell you, I think it's good news. So let's talk about this a little bit. If you're sitting down and you're making a list of the things that you can control during the COVID-19 pandemic, you're probably not checking much off. However, if you're measuring the power of the things that you actually can check off, well, the fact that you can 100% control your attitude trumps everything else on the list. Your attitude will determine your success after all of this is over. So right now, I want to help you focus your mind on something positive. As of this moment in time, as a student of generations in the workforce, I believe everything wrapped up in this pandemic, specifically the quarantine, is creating lasting, positive effects on the Gen Z workforce. Now, let me pump the brakes for just a second and define who Gen Z is not. So Gen Z and Millennials are not the same people group. So both of these generations, they grew up and they experienced and are experiencing very different situations in their formative years. And if you try to recruit and retain and train them the same way, you'll be more likely to earn yourself a negative result than a positive one. So let's think about generations for a second. Generations are most accurately defined by their shared experiences, not birth years. Although, we use birth years often because that can help give an easier picture of who likely falls into a generation. So with that being said, Gen Z, the focus of today's conversation, is approximately 4 to 24 years old. Some Gen Zs are already in your workforce, but some Gen Zs are just barely out of pull-ups. So, now that we have that covered and we've established who Gen Z is, let's move forward. So there are 3 things we're going to talk about today. 3 things that I think that the COVID-19 pandemic are affecting. And it's loyalty, how they deal with change, and how their minds are racing, how they're going to be able to add even more value to the workforce. So let's first talk about loyalty. So we've seen loyalty to companies change throughout generations. Older generations have been more likely to stay with one company, where younger generations have been more likely to move often between companies. And when employees move, companies, you have retention issues that cause negative effects on both your performance and your profitability. So older generations, those that grew up during the World War and the Great Depression, they generally have an attitude where they're grateful to simply have a job. And then they hold on to it because of that. They don't leave and go to multiple companies often throughout their career. They grew up in hard times where jobs weren't right around the corner and you couldn't scroll through millions of Google search results and have your pick of what job you wanted. But things have changed for younger generations. Up until this point, the job market has been an employee's market. Gen Zs have come into the work world in the last few years with huge opportunity before them. But will this pandemic change that? I think it's definitely possible. So the economic effects, think about that for a second. All of the economic effects of this pandemic are still to be seen. But if this lasts very long, I think it's likely that many Gen Zs will enter the job market in a place more similar to older generations. So instead of having all these options to move companies whenever, wherever, I think that they'll be more likely to find what they need and hold on to it. And you think about Gen Zs right now, they're seeing right now which companies are sustainable in hard times and which are not. And this is not the first time they've seen this either. Think about the recession in 07 and 08. Gen Z experienced that event, the effects of it on their parents' retirement, on their parents' employment, and even their parents' ability to afford to send them to a university or forcing them to choose a trade for themselves instead. I believe that these events, both that recession and now the pandemic, will cause Gen Zs to pay attention to whether or not their parents' employees were taking care of them during these hard times, or if they were just, cutting them off and leaving them to fend for themselves. So my question to you is, what are they seeing from you and your company in relation to that? Here's the deal. Whether intentionally or not, Gen Z is making little deposits of information into their mind that will affect how they search for an employer in the future. And I can definitely see where they will be a generation who's searching for a company that is more stable versus more risky. A company that is widely known for taking care of their employees. And I think it's possible they could be searching for entrepreneurial opportunities in an industry that is essential to daily human life. I think that Generation Z is going to be more focused on finding stability because the world as they've known it is so volatile. And now that's an interesting shift from where millennials stood at the same point in their lives. Millennials, they had seen, the world before them, all this opportunity before them. They had tons of job opportunities and they were able to accelerate their career really fast. And that's just different than where Gen Z is at today and will be in the coming months. So older generations looked for careers based on company stability and profitability. And up to this point, younger generations had looked for careers based on personal and professional goals and social impact. I'm not going to be surprised if we see Gen Z attitudes shift back to the same place where older generations were. Now, here's the good news. This is my point in all of this talk about loyalty. If you are a company who checks those boxes, if you are essential services, if you take incredible care of your employees, if your business is sustainable during hard times, then I think when Gen Z realizes this, and you may have to tell your story really well to make that happen in the recruiting process, but I think when they realize this, then they'll be searching for jobs within your company. And then I think it's likely that they're going to be there for a longer haul than maybe the millennials before them. After experiencing this pandemic, and probably this is going to throw us into a second recession as Gen Z is growing up, I see them searching for stability and security. And with the right leadership in place, this could mean for you increased loyalty, which equals increased retention, which equals increased performance, which equals increased profitability. And that is something that all of us can look forward to and get excited about, right? Okay, now let's shift gears for a second. So we talked about loyalty and how the pandemic could be affecting them from a loyalty standpoint. Now let's talk about their approach to success. So, baby boomers grew up very competitive. There were a ton of them and not as many job opportunities. They learned to become the smartest, the hardest working, and put in their time in order to earn success. And then came after Gen X, so boomers, Gen X, then millennials. The millennials came in and just rocked the workforce, came in with guns blazing, claiming that education trumps experience. And millennials showed the value of change and rapid innovation in order to earn success. So will Gen Z act more like millennials or boomers after experiencing this pandemic? I think that the best case scenario will be that Gen Z ends up becoming a blend of boomers and millennials from this perspective. I can see where, because of the economic repercussions of this pandemic, that there might be fewer opportunities to earn success in the job market. And that's going to require Gen Zs to level up their performance and become rapid innovators to earn success. And that, friends, that sounds like a recipe that we all can welcome into the workforce. We'll all have our arms wide open wanting Gen Z to become our newest employees. So let's shift gears again. So we talked about loyalty. We talked about their approach to success and how that compared to generations before them and how the pandemic might change how they act in the workplace in order to achieve success. Now let's talk about change, how they deal with change. So if you've heard the word change agent, typically the words change agent, when talked about in regards to generations, it's typically used in a conversation about millennials. Millennials typically remember life before technology was critically important. We remember Grandma's telephone that had a 10-foot coiled cord attaching it to the kitchen wall. But then we quickly adapted to personal cell phones as the only option for a phone. We also remember waiting by the radio to record our favorite song on a cassette tape. But then we quickly moved from a Walkman to an iPod and now listening to music wherever, whenever, however we want. So change became a way of life for millennials. They were change agents. In general, millennials are typically good at change, at navigating change. So for Gen Zs, it could be argued that the truth of rapid change during their life remains the same as millennials. But I would say there is something different that is happening during the formative years, especially right now, that did not happen at this level for millennials. So I don't know where you're at right now, but I'm in Kentucky. That's where I'm from. And all the schools are closed. Many of the businesses here are operating differently than they did before, and some businesses are crumbling. So what are the Gen Zs that I know, that I see? What are they doing? So remember how old they are. Most of them are school age. Most of them are still living with their parents who are now working from home or out of their normal line of work completely. It's completely different than what it was a month or two ago. So this is causing Gen Z's mind to just start racing like crazy. So what could be racing through a Gen Z's conscious and subconscious mind through all of this? I think 3 things. So, number 1, the importance of technology. So many schools are moving from in-person classes to online classes, including my kindergartner. So many businesses have sent their employees home to work. So Gen Z is now watching their parents work on computers, where they used to just see them, for the most part, leave the house and go to work. So Gen Zs are digitally native. They've never known a world without it. And as they're working and as they watch their parents working, it's possible that their digitally native minds are already coming up with ways to work anywhere, anytime, and better than we can today. Because they understand technology and see the world differently than generations before them, it's likely that Gen Z will come up with solutions that nobody else have thought of yet. Solutions that are way better than anything that exists today. So my question is to you as a leader: what can you do to embrace change and interact more with Gen Zs so you can lead the way to a better, more flexible work environment in the future? Because that's what the future is going to want. The second thing I believe that Gen Z's minds are racing around, things that could be changing in the future because of Gen Z. So we thought that robots and artificial intelligence were taking hold and replacing humans in the workforce before this pandemic. I think that's going to skyrocket as Gen Z's coming up. Gen Z's minds right now are probably racing with solutions that fix the human-related issues companies are facing because of this pandemic. I think that the increase in technology was likely to happen anyway, but I can see clearly where the effects of this pandemic are going to escalate that rate at which technology solutions are both created and implemented. Why? Because if Gen Z is looking for ways to innovate so they can earn opportunity, they are deeply feeling the current issues, and instinctively, I think that they're likely going to be thinking of solutions in regards to technology-based issues. Remember, they're already hearing that we're probably going to go into some sort of recession and the job market might not look as good as it did before. So how can they innovate? How can they be the person that stands out? How can they have the ideas that nobody else has? Gen Z's mind is racing already, I believe, about those answers. So point number 3. Talking about change. So many Gen Z's worlds are currently just turned upside down. Students who are missing out on their last sports season with their lifelong friends. Seniors who may not attend their prom or walk in their own graduation ceremony. Kids who've only ever attended school in person and now are only attending school from behind a screen. Lots of overnight changes because of this pandemic for Gen Z. So millennials adapted and created change over time. This pandemic has slapped Gen Z in the face with change overnight. I think that millennials became good at changing and the process of changing and how that moves along. I think Gen Zs are going to give millennials a run for their money on who's the best at navigating change going forward, especially because of this pandemic, how fast it hit, how fast they had to change emotionally, physically, and adapt to what is going on. I think that this is a good exercise for Gen Z, and I think it's going to make them even better employees navigating that change in the workforce going forward. I don't know about you, but I am hopeful for the future. Ever since I started reading every single piece of research I could get my hands on a few years ago, I see the world through a different lens than most people. I'm constantly asking myself if generational differences might exist here and if this is going to be a good thing or a bad thing. And maybe that makes me a nerd. Maybe you're thinking, this girl is a nerd, but I'm totally good with that. Thinking about the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and quarantine on the Gen Z workforce, while it can feel scary to many people right now, because of everything we just talked about, I'm excited to see how Gen Z emerges to work in the workforce, in your workplace, to conquer, collaborate, and create a better world than we've known before. I'm excited, and I hope you are too. If you need help in your workforce understanding generations so you can work better together, please reach out to me. I'd love to help you. You can email me anytime at Alyson@vanhooser.com. That's ALYSON at VANHOOSER.com. Have a great day, guys.